What happens when one of Hollywood's most iconic action legends steps into a daytime talk show studio expecting a routine promotional appearance, only to find himself drawn into an unexpectedly tense battle of words that is exactly the kind of dramatic moment viewers live for, and it's precisely what unfolded when Arnold Schwarzenegger appeared on The View alongside one of its most outspoken co-hosts, Behar. What was supposed to be a straightforward conversation about health, fitness, and personal discipline quickly transformed into a charged exchange that left the studio audience silent and viewers at home glued to their screens. The morning had begun like countless other episodes of the long-running talk show. The cameras rolled smoothly across the brightly lit studio, capturing the polished set and the familiar semicircle table where the hosts gathered daily to discuss politics, culture, and current events. The audience applauded enthusiastically as the hosts took their seats, exchanging pleasantries and teasing the upcoming segment. There was nothing to suggest that this particular episode would soon become the subject of heated online debate. Arnold Schwarzenegger entered with his trademark confidence, the blend of charisma, discipline, and calm authority that has defined his public persona for decades. Known globally for his bodybuilding achievements, blockbuster films, and political career, he carried himself with the relaxed composure of someone accustomed to high-pressure environments. He was there to promote his latest fitness initiative, a program designed to encourage healthier lifestyles, particularly among younger generations who struggle with sedentary habits in an increasingly digital world. His message was simple: personal responsibility, consistency, and the power of small daily improvements. At first, the conversation followed a predictable path. The hosts asked about his workout philosophy, his motivation techniques, and how he continues to stay physically active well into his 70s. Arnold responded with measured enthusiasm, emphasizing discipline and the importance of mental strength. He spoke about the value of setting goals and maintaining a vision, principles he has often credited for his success in bodybuilding, acting, and public service. Then the tone shifted. Behar leaned back slightly in her chair, her expression sharpening. Known for her direct questioning style, she pivoted away from the promotional discussion and addressed a controversial chapter of Arnold's early bodybuilding career. Her voice carried a hint of skepticism as she posed a blunt question. Wasn't it hypocritical, she suggested, for someone with a history tied to steroid use to now lecture Americans about health and fitness? The effect was immediate. The lively atmosphere evaporated, replaced by an almost tangible stillness. The audience, which had been laughing moments earlier, fell silent. Even the other hosts appeared caught off guard by the abruptness of the question. It was no longer a light morning show exchange. It felt more like a cross-examination. Arnold's posture stiffened slightly, though he maintained his composure. A subtle shift crossed his face, not anger, but focus. When he responded, his Austrian accent seemed more pronounced, cutting clearly through the tension in the room. He stated calmly that he had never hidden his bodybuilding past. In fact, he had always spoken openly about the realities of that era in professional bodybuilding. He reminded the panel that the sport was different decades ago and that transparency about one's journey, including its complexities, was essential. More importantly, he emphasized that his present mission was about helping people make better choices today. He argued that growth and evolution are part of any life story. Dwelling solely on past controversies, he implied, distracts from the positive impact someone can make now. His tone was steady, controlled, and deliberate, the demeanor of someone who has faced far harsher scrutiny in politics and public life. But Joy pressed further, leaning forward. She sharpened her critique, suggesting that public figures who promote lifestyle advice must be held to the highest standards. Didn't Americans deserve complete honesty? Wasn't it fair, she implied, to question whether someone with a controversial past could credibly advocate for healthy living? The word questionable hung in the air after she used it to describe his past. It was a loaded choice, one that reframed the conversation from historical context to moral judgment. The tension intensified again. Viewers could sense that the exchange had reached a pivotal moment. Arnold raised an eyebrow. Subtle gesture, but one that spoke volumes. It signaled both disbelief and readiness. Rather than reacting emotionally, he appeared prepared to double down on his central argument, that personal history, when acknowledged openly, should not disqualify someone from encouraging positive change. In his view, experience, even flawed experience, can become a source of credibility rather than contradiction. The clash highlighted a broader cultural debate about accountability, redemption, and authority. Can individuals evolve beyond earlier chapters of their lives? Should past actions permanently define public credibility? And to what extent should media interviews prioritize confrontation over constructive dialogue? By the time this segment moved forward, it was clear that what had begun as a promotional appearance had evolved into something much more layered. It was not simply about steroids or fitness, it was about legacy, transparency, and the expectations placed on public figures who attempt to reinvent or expand their influence. The tension in the studio had already reached an uncomfortable level, but Arnold chose his next words carefully, determined not to let the exchange spiral completely out of control. He leaned slightly forward in his chair, maintaining steady eye contact across the table. His posture was firm but not aggressive, the posture of someone who had learned long ago that composure can be more powerful than anger. With all due respect, Joy, he began, his tone calm yet unmistakably resolute, I think you're creating drama where none exists. His voice carried a measured authority, not raised, not trembling. Simply steady. It was the kind of tone that suggested experience. The decades of interviews, debates, and public scrutiny had clearly taught him the value of restraint. I came here to talk about a new program that teaches children about nutrition and exercise. That's what I understood this interview would focus on. The words were not defensive, they were clarifying. Arnold wasn't denying his past, nor was he appearing flustered by the criticism. Instead, he was redirecting the conversation toward what he believed was the true purpose of his appearance. The initiative he referenced was something he spoke about with genuine passion, a project aimed at helping young people develop healthier habits in a world increasingly dominated by fast food, processed snacks, and sedentary lifestyles. To him, this was not a publicity stunt but a mission rooted in personal conviction. Joy, however, did not retreat. Her expression hardened slightly, and she responded quickly, almost as if she had anticipated his attempt to shift the narrative. I think our viewers can connect the dots, she shot back, her tone sharper now. The implication in her words was clear. She believed the audience was intelligent enough to see what she suggested was a pattern the career built, in her view, on physical image, influence, and reinvention. The atmosphere grew thicker. The other hosts seated around the table exchanged uneasy glances. They shifted subtly in their chairs, their body language revealing discomfort. This was not the light, energetic morning segment they had prepared for. It had taken on the weight of a pointed confrontation, the kind that makes producers tense behind the cameras and audiences hold their breath. Joy leaned forward slightly, pressing her argument with increasing intensity. You made millions off your physique, she said, emphasizing each phrase deliberately. Then you went into politics. And now you're back making money off fitness. It's very convenient, isn't it? The question hung in the air, less a request for explanation and more an accusation wrapped in rhetorical form. Her words suggested opportunism, the idea that Arnold had simply followed whichever path promised influence and financial reward. It was a bold assertion, one that framed his diverse career not as evolution but as strategy. For a moment, the studio lights seemed harsher, the silence between sentences heavier. Arnold's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. It was a small physical reaction, but noticeable to anyone watching closely. Despite that subtle sign of tension, his voice remained steady, controlled, and deliberate when he responded. Joy, I'm going to stop you right there, he said, raising his hand slightly, not in anger, but as a signal that he intended to address the claim directly and firmly. The gesture was calm but decisive. It communicated boundaries. He was no longer merely answering questions, he was drawing a line. His expression reflected a mix of patience and determination, the look of someone unwilling to let his life's work be reduced to a simplistic narrative. In that moment, the exchange shifted from pointed questioning to a broader philosophical clash. Joy appeared to be challenging the authenticity of his motivations, suggesting that financial gain and public image had always been at the center of his decisions. Arnold, on the other hand, seemed prepared to argue that ambition, reinvention, and influence do not automatically equate to exploitation. For him, success in bodybuilding had opened doors. Acting had amplified his platform. Politics had allowed him to serve, and returning to fitness advocacy was, in his view, a return to his roots, not a calculated convenience. The tension was palpable. Audience members sat frozen, unsure whether to applaud, react, or remain silent. The cameras captured every subtle movement, the raised eyebrows, the tightened lips, the shifting shoulders of co-hosts uncertain about when or whether to interject. Arnold's decision to interrupt was not an act of aggression, it was an assertion of control. He was signaling that the narrative being constructed around him required correction. There was a quiet intensity in his eyes, suggesting he was prepared to defend not just his current project, but the integrity of his decades-long career. This was no longer simply a discussion about children's nutrition programs. It had evolved into a conversation about legacy, intention, and public perception. Was his journey one of calculated reinvention for profit, as Joy implied? Or was it an example of adaptability and commitment to personal growth, as Arnold appeared ready to argue? The studio remained suspended in that fragile balance, the moment stretched thin between confrontation and clarification. Arnold's raised hand and steady voice marked a turning point. He had made it clear that while he was open to tough questions, he would not accept what he viewed as a distorted portrayal of his life's work. The air in the studio had grown noticeably heavier, as though every word spoken carried twice its usual weight. Arnold straightened in his chair, drawing in a controlled breath before responding again. His tone remained measured, but there was now a sharper edge beneath the calm surface, the sound of someone who felt compelled to defend not just a program, but his integrity first. He began deliberately, ensuring there could be no misunderstanding. This program is completely free. No one pays anything. We are providing educational materials to schools across the country at no cost. Teachers receive lesson plans. Students receive guidance about nutrition, exercise, and healthy routines. There are no hidden fees, no subscription models, no premium upgrades, so your assumption that I'm profiting from this is simply wrong. He paused briefly, allowing the clarity of his statement to settle in the room. His words were precise, almost clinical in their delivery, as if he were laying out facts in a courtroom, rather than participating in a talk show discussion. To him, this wasn't a marketing strategy. It was an initiative aimed at addressing what he saw as a public health issue: rising childhood obesity, declining physical activity, and the lack of basic nutritional education in many school systems. Joy responded almost instantly, her reaction sharp and dismissive. "Oh, please," she interjected, rolling her eyes in a gesture that did not go unnoticed by the audience. "Nothing is ever truly free. There's always an angle. That's how Hollywood works. That's how politics works, and apparently, that's how your fitness empire works." Her words carried an unmistakable implication that behind every philanthropic effort lies self-interest. She suggested that even generosity can be strategic, that reputation management often disguises itself as charity. The studio grew even quieter, as if everyone present sensed that the exchange had moved beyond disagreement into something more personal. For the first time, visible frustration flickered across Arnold's face. His jaw tightened slightly, and a faint crease formed between his brows, yet he did not lash out. He did not raise his voice. Instead, he chose diplomacy, a conscious effort to remain composed, despite the mounting provocation. "I understand skepticism, Joy," he replied evenly. "It's healthy to ask questions, but I would appreciate the chance to fully explain the program before you dismiss it." "I'm not dismissing anything," Joy shot back defensively. "I'm asking the tough questions journalists are supposed to ask. Isn't that what you'd want? Or would you prefer softball questions like you get on other shows?" The accusation lingered. It framed him as someone accustomed to comfortable interviews, unwilling to face scrutiny. Arnold's posture stiffened slightly. The firmness in his voice became more pronounced. "Tough questions are fine," he responded, his tone now carrying unmistakable resolve. "But attacking my character and making false accusations is not journalism. It's something else." A murmur rippled through the audience, a low, collective reaction that signaled the shift in energy. This was no longer merely an interview. It had become a confrontation over credibility and fairness. Viewers watching from home could likely sense the unusual intensity, the rawness of the exchange that daytime television rarely sustains for long. "I'm not attacking anyone," Joy insisted, her voice rising slightly as she defended her position. "I'm pointing out inconsistencies. You appear on television, you give speeches, you write books about success and achievement, but you never address the elephant in the room." Arnold leaned forward, his patience visibly thinning. "And what elephant is that?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "That you built your career on artificial enhancement," she stated bluntly. "Then you entered politics, where you influenced drug policy, and now you're back telling people how to live healthy, natural lives. Don't you see how that looks hypocritical?" The accusation was direct and unfiltered. It suggested not merely contradiction but moral inconsistency. That His past choices undermined his present advocacy. The weight of her words seemed to press down on the table between them. Arnold clasped his hands tightly together on the tabletop, his knuckles whitened under the studio lights. A subtle but unmistakable sign of strain. He inhaled slowly, before speaking again, choosing precision over emotion. "Joy," he said, his voice controlled but edged with steel, "you are making serious accusations without all the facts. You are also ignoring decades of my public service, my environmental initiatives, my work with children, and countless efforts to promote health and responsibility. You are focusing only on controversy." His response broadened the context of his life's work. He reminded her, and the audience, that his career had not been defined solely by bodybuilding. He had served in public office, championed environmental causes, supported after-school programs, and spoken openly about discipline, resilience, and second chances. In his view, reducing his entire legacy to one aspect of his early career was not only unfair, but misleading. "I'm focusing on the truth," Joy replied firmly, and there it was, the central divide. Both believed they were defending truth. Joy saw her role as confronting perceived contradictions, challenging narratives that seemed too polished. Arnold saw himself as defending a fuller, more nuanced story, one that included growth, transparency, and redemption. The studio sat suspended in that clash of perspectives. On one side was skepticism, rooted in the belief that public figures must be held accountable for every chapter of their past. On the other side was the argument that evolution matters, that a person's earlier decisions, openly acknowledged, should not permanently invalidate later contributions. Joy did not hesitate. She leaned forward again, her voice firm, her posture rigid with conviction. "And the truth is," she said pointedly, "you've reinvented yourself whenever it suited you. Bodybuilder, movie star, governor, environmental advocate, now fitness mentor again. Every time the spotlight shifts, you shift with it. And now you're doing it again." Her words carried the weight of accusation, suggesting not evolution but calculation, not growth, but strategy. The implication was clear, that Arnold's life had been less about passion and purpose and more about positioning and opportunity. The studio lights seemed almost harsher in that instant, illuminating every subtle change in expression at the table. Arnold inhaled slowly. "The truth," he replied, and this time there was a sharpness in his voice that had not been there before, "is that you seem more interested in creating headlines than having a real conversation about helping people." The temperature in the room dropped. His tone was no longer merely calm and corrective. It carried restrained frustration. It wasn't loud, but it was cutting. Each word was deliberate, placed with precision. For a brief moment, even the faint background noises of the studio seemed to disappear. The audience fell completely silent, hanging onto every syllable, as if they were witnessing a live wire being stretched tighter and tighter. Around the table, the other hosts shifted in their seats. One glanced toward the producers off camera, another opened her mouth slightly, as if preparing to interject, then thought better of it. They looked ready to step in, but unsure of how to de-escalate something that had clearly moved beyond a routine disagreement. "That's rich," Joy fired back quickly, refusing to cede ground, coming from someone who has built an entire career on headlines, between the blockbuster movies, the personal scandals, the political campaigns, the dramatic comebacks. "You're hardly someone who avoids attention." The words struck like sparks against steel. She was no longer questioning a program or even his motivations. She was cataloging his life's most public controversies. The subtext was unmistakable. "You thrive on attention, so don't accuse me of seeking it." That was the moment something shifted, not loudly, not explosively, but unmistakably. Arnold's expression changed in a way that everyone in the room could see. The practiced diplomacy, the measured smile, the careful patience that had defined his earlier responses, it slipped. In its place appeared something far more intense. His eyes sharpened, flashing with a focus that seemed almost cinematic. The composure remained, but it was no longer gentle, it was controlled force. For decades, audiences had watched him portray powerful figures, warriors, leaders, unstoppable forces of will. In that instant, the presence across from Joy felt less like a talk show guest and more like the embodiment of the relentless determination that had defined his public persona. This was no longer just an actor promoting a project, no longer merely a former governor defending policy decisions. The man sitting there had built a global bodybuilding career from nothing, broken into Hollywood despite language barriers and skepticism. dominated the box office, entered politics in one of the world's largest economies, and returned repeatedly to public life after setbacks that would have ended many careers. Reinvention, to him, was not opportunism, it was survival and ambition. His posture straightened subtly, shoulders squared, hands resting firmly on the table. There was a steadiness to him now that felt less defensive and more resolute. The message in his body language was unmistakable. He would not be reduced to a caricature of headlines and controversy dot around them. The audience remained frozen. No applause, no murmurs, just anticipation. The energy had shifted from argumentative to electric, the kind of charged silence that precedes a defining statement. He was finished being talked over. Finished being framed solely by his past. Finished allowing the narrative to be shaped without his full voice. "You know what?" he began, and those three words carried the weight of a turning point. They were not shouted, they were not theatrical. But they signaled that whatever came next would not be a rehearsed talking point or a polite redirection. It would be personal, direct, unfiltered. In that suspended moment, it felt as though two philosophies stood opposed across the table: skepticism versus self-determination, confrontation versus conviction. The studio, the audience, even the co-hosts seemed to sense that they were witnessing more than a tense interview. They were watching a collision between public narrative and personal identity, between a host determined to challenge and a guest unwilling to be diminished.